So let's go ahead and go over all of our pieces here. I have everything already cut out, labeled, and fused. Anything that needs interfacing has the interfacing on it. So let's go through our pieces, and then let's talk a little bit about cork and directionality and some of the options that you have for your handles. I'm gonna skip those for now, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So let's go through our pieces here. I have two pieces that are labeled A. These are for my outside top, so this is gonna be the top part of the bag. I have two pieces here for B. B is going to be the flap. Since I'm using cork, I don't have interfacing on any of these pieces for the outside. I also have two pieces for C. This is going to be for the bottom. This is the raisin color cork. I just love this. I'm a purple fan. So that's the bottom. As far as my lining pieces, I am skipping the handle, so I'm skipping D for right now. We're gonna come back to that. I have my two E pieces for the lining. This is out of the Essex linen. I believe this is color mocha. It's kind of a brownish purple. I thought it looked really pretty with this. These both have interfacing, so those are all set to go. I also have two pieces for F. F is going to be for my zippered pocket. There is one in the lining and one on the outside, so these do not have any interfacing. If you've done my zippered pockets in any of my other patterns, you're very familiar with that already. And then I also have two pieces for G. I have them folded in half. It's what I always do with my pockets. It's just a force of habit. So G, again, no interfacing. These are gonna be for the inside divided pockets. This purse has lots of pockets inside and out. And the last pieces right here are H. There's 4 of these, no interfacing. These are going to be for the recessed zipper closure. So let's go back and talk about D, because I do have a few options for D, and this is really going to be a personal call on what you like. So for D, I have a few strips cut out of my print, and I have a few cut out of my solid. In the pattern, it's going to tell you that the solid is going to be for your handles, which it absolutely is. There's plenty here. So I have 2 strips. I can make this into a single handle like the pattern says, or I can make this adjustable, and I'm gonna show you how to do an adjustable handle today. It's kind of a little bit of a bonus. The pattern only calls for the single non-adjustable handle, and you can very easily do that. We'll talk about that as well, but I'm gonna do mine as an adjustable handle. I also cut some strips from D because from my floral, because I had some extra. So I do have plenty. I just have this one strip right here. Yes, it's directional. I did not worry about it for this piece. I worried about it for my other pieces. I did cut this so that I could do a single handle out of this. So I will, as we're going along, top stitch this and get this ready for a single handle. And then I'll show you if you want to do an adjustable handle, how to do that. I'm going to show you both in the video. So you can definitely do this. If you have a directional cork and this bothers you, that's a decision that you'll have to make. So when we're looking at the outside top of the bag, I'm able to cut that correctly with my directional cork. When I put my handle on, it's gonna go like this. So I'm gonna have the flowers kind of right side up on one side, upside down on the other. If that bugs you, then this might not be the best way for you to go. You might wanna just stick with the accent color from the bottom and use that for your handle. For me, this is not a big deal. And once this is folded in half, it really doesn't make a difference to me. So I don't stress about that. Now, if I wanted to make an adjustable handle with the print, if I want to have the entire top portion of the bag in the same color or print, I was able to cut a couple of extra little strips here. I can piece them together and I can add them onto each end and make a long handle and make it adjustable. So you do have a couple of options. So the pattern calls for the solid. You have the option of doing the print. You could even mix and match them. There's definitely some wiggle room when it comes to your cork. It calls for 2 18 by 27 inch pieces. Those are fat quarter size. Once you cut out your top, your bottom, your flap, play around with the handles and see what you want to do. It's really a personal choice. And I have to write the pattern a certain way just so that you know what you're getting into. Trying to include all of this information would be an entire extra page in a pattern. So I thought I would show you in the video rather than try to write that. So when we get to this step, I will go over how to do this. And I will also show you how to do this as fabric. I have an extra fabric strip cut just so that you can see how many different options you have for your handles. So I'm going to put these aside, and I'm going to also just show you real quick These were my leftover pieces. So just so you can see what I had left over from my cork, this is after I cut handles and this is after I cut handles. Obviously you would be cutting one or the other, but I just wanted to show you, you do have a little bit left over if you want to make a matching accessory, if you want to do anything different, you know, make a tassel, a wallet, whatever that is. So you do have a little bit of extra cork. So I'm gonna put these all aside and I'm gonna go ahead and grab the rest of my pieces, my hardware, and all of the other tools that I'll use. So I went ahead and grabbed all of the rest of my supplies here. I have my zippers. I have a smaller scrap here of the black and gunmetal that I'm gonna use on the outside back zippered pocket. I didn't really like any of the colors I had with the cork, so I decided to go with that one. For the lining, I just picked a light gray and gunmetal, and I have my zipper pulls. So I have one for each pocket and then for the top. I also have a slide set, totally optional, but that is going to be for my adjustable handle. Like I said, I'm gonna demo both of those for you. So this is 1.5 inches wide. I have a rectangle ring and I have the slide. I will show you how to add those on if you want to do an adjustable handle. And I've also chosen a flip lock for my flap. You can use a flip lock, you can use a twist lock, a magnet, whatever you would like, any kind of closure that you like. I love the flip lock, so I'm gonna use this. So when that's in the bag, it looks kind of like that. There are screws on the back of this one, so I do have my small screwdriver. If you have a Diva wallet screwdriver, one of the magnetic ones, it's probably gonna be a little bit too small for this, just fair warning. You wanna go up to a little bit larger size screwdriver. This one actually is a little bit on the small side as well, but it's bigger than the other one. So I have those. And then my basic supplies here, I have clips, always have tons of clips. I've got some scissors. I have my rotary cutter. I am using my mat and my ruler to do all of my cutting and my trimming. I have some marking tools here, so it depends on what I'm marking on. If I'm marking on dark fabrics, I have my chalk pencil, and I also have this vinyl marking pencil from Mormino, and then I have a couple of regular pens. I do write on the back of anything light colored, like my cork, with a permanent pen. If I'm not gonna see it, I don't really care, so I just mark with whatever I want. And then I also have here, of course, my stiletto, my turning tool for my flap. This also has a seam ripper. It's my 4-in-1 tool. I grabbed some pins. I'll use those when I put in the zippered pocket. I have my thread. I'm using Aurifil 40 weight cotton. I thought this nice light grayish purple would be pretty. We're gonna find out. I didn't have anything darker, but I liked how that one looked, so we're gonna see. And then I also have my needles here. I get asked a lot and I forget to tell you guys, so just so that you can see, I am gonna be using a top stitch needle. This is 116. It's a little larger than I would prefer. I'd rather have a 90-14, but I can't seem to find any right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this one. I like having a larger needle and I like the top stitch or the Microtex rather than a universal. So I have this. I do have some 90-14 universals that I might use for some of the sewing, but I really like this when it comes to top stitching my handles and doing any of my cork work. And then I want to talk quickly about tape here. I have two different kinds because I am making a cork outside. So there's a zippered pocket on the lining and there's a zippered pocket on the outside. For the lining pocket, because it's all cotton, I have this fusible tape. I've talked about this, I've used this in a lot of videos. I'm sure you guys have seen this. I sell it on the website, but this is a 1/4 inch wide and it's a fusible product. So it's great when you're doing a zipper or when you're doing your recess zipper closure, anything on cotton, because you do need to use the heat from your iron to fuse this. When it comes to cork, I do iron on my cork. However, when you're trying to iron a zipper in place, you really can't iron from the front side, which is how I like to do my cotton zippers. It's really hard to do that because you can't get enough heat through the cork. So I use this non-fusible tape. If you've made any of my cork projects, any of the free ones like the Daybreak or Sydney on the YouTube channel, I've talked about this. This I bought on Amazon. It's the quilter's tape. I will try to get a link for that in the info. You can order this and you get like 4 rolls of it, I think for like $12. It's really awesome because it's non-fusible and it sticks really nicely. So I'm gonna use them in the same manner. This one I'll fuse, this one I won't. I could skip this one altogether and just use the non-fusible, but when I use cotton, I don't know. I think it's just a habit. I like to fuse it, so I have them both. So now that we have all of our pieces and everything's cut out, let's go ahead and start on step 1. So for step 1, you're going to sew your A and your C pieces together to make your front and back of the bag. If you are using a directional cork like I am, just make sure that you pay attention to that. You want to make sure that my cork is going to be in the right direction when I'm done. So I would put these two pieces right sides together. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam across here. It's a 1/4 inch seam for the entire pattern, as it says in your pattern itself, but just want to make sure that you know that. Make sure that I backstitch, and then I like to press this seam open. Now, if you are using fabric, you are going to be doing this with just the fabric. It's not going to be interfaced yet, okay? So make sure that your A and your C, if it is already, if you've gone ahead and done that, it's not that big of a deal. Because I'm using cork, I didn't have to worry about that, and I do have one already done. So I went ahead and I sewed those with my 1/4 inch seam. I pressed my seam open. I used my pressing clapper, which is awesome for cork. It really helps to get everything to lay flat. And then I chose to do an 1/8 inch top stitching. You can do an 1/8 or a 1/4, you could do both. You can do decorative, whatever you want on here. It's your bag, so you make it as personal to you as you want. So I did an 1/8 of an inch because I like how it looks, but also it catches that seam, so it really secures that. And I'm not sure if you can see this or not. Let me try to get this close. But do you see how I have some stitches on the side here? I actually start on the side. That way I don't have to worry about losing any of my stitching as I go along. And I start there and then come over, turn, and come back. The other reason that I do that is if you have ever had an issue with your machine, I find this a lot with my domestic more than my heavy duty, where I'm trying to start the stitching and I'm putting it under the foot and it's getting caught and doesn't want to move. This seems to help it. It's already on the cork and then it kind of comes around. So that's just what I do. So again, if this was fabric, I would now turn this over and put my interfacing on the entire piece. You do not have to for cork. If you wanted to, you could, but you really don't have to. So now I am done and I am ready to move on to step 2, which is fusing. I have already done my fusing because I only had a little bit of cotton to worry about for the inside. If you have not done your fusing yet, you're going to go ahead and follow step 2. You're going to fuse this after it's sewn together. You're going to fuse your lining pieces and you're going to fuse your handles if they're cotton. If you're using cork, you don't have too much fusing to do, you just have to do your lining pieces. So now that that's all set, we're ready to move on to step 3. Okay, so let's go ahead on to step 3 and prepare the handle. I do have a couple of things I want to show you that are going to be in addition to the pattern. So I have some samples here. They don't have linings in them yet. Hopefully by the time this video comes out, they will, but for right now, they do not. I always have something in progress, right? So I have 2 here just so that you can see a couple of the ways these are going to look. So this one right here, I cut the handle from the bottom fabric, from the bottom cork. Apparently I really do love purple. I forgot that I already had one with a lot of purple, but that's okay. So that's how that looks when you have the contrast on the handle. I had a little bit of extra. I made this one a little bit longer. This is much longer than I would normally want it, and I did put a seam in the middle, but I had the cork, so I wanted to go ahead and make this nice long handle. This is not adjustable. So that is how your handle would look if you're doing it as a single non-adjustable handle. When it comes to fabric, I've had you cut an entire width of fabric strip. That way you can make the decision on what length you want. I have to wear a winter coat for, too many months out of the year, and sometimes I need a little bit of extra room because of the bulkiness of sweaters and coats. If I'm using this in the summer, I want it a little bit shorter. If I'm carrying it in my hand, I want it a different length. So I do like having the option of having it adjustable, but I did originally write the pattern as a single fixed handle. So that's how your handle would look. You would just have it top stitched and attached to your bag, no adjustments. This is how the pattern is going to tell you to do it. Let's look at this one right here. So this, I also used the same cork, as the top. I like this look a little bit better. I like when the bottom is a different color and the top half is the same color. So this just pleases me a little bit more. I did add the adjustable handle or the slide set onto this. So this handle itself, this is pretty long. I think I had some extra cork. And again, don't forget, you can always adjust this to whatever fits your needs. So if you don't like the length I've given you or the amount I've given you and you want to order extra cork or you have extra cork, you can always make your handle longer. You also don't have to piece it. If you would prefer to buy a longer length, like a 54-inch piece, you can go ahead and cut one single strip for your handle. There's always options outside of the pattern. I just have to narrow them down and pick one or two to put it into the pattern. That way it's not super confusing. So for this one, I had a little extra cork. I was able to get a really long handle. I could probably wear this bag crossbody if I wanted to. So just so you can kind of see how those look. So let's see the options that I have for my sample for today's video. I've gone ahead and I made a very small piece out of fabric. I want to show you how to fold it and also talk about the interfacing. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. I have my purple piece right here. I'm going to show you how to fold this if you want to get two clean edges. And then I also have my pattern piece right here that I had two pieces. I have short ends right here, so there's seams on both ends. And I also cut from my scrap a little piece for the tab. So let's go over these, then we'll top stitch, and then I will show you how to do the hardware. So let's start with fabric. If you are just doing a single fixed handle, your interfacing can go all the way down to the end. That is fine. That's not going to be too heavy or too bulky for your machine. If you're using cotton and you want to do the slide set, what you're going to want to do is short your interfacing a couple of inches on your strip, and you're going to do this on both ends. That way, when we put this on, it's not going to be too heavy for your machine. If you have an industrial or a heavy-duty machine, you don't really have to worry about this, but for a domestic, we want to reduce some of the bulk. So what I would do is short this on both ends, and then I would go ahead and cut my tab off of this long piece right here. When we do the hardware, that will make a little bit more sense. As for folding, cotton is very easy to fold. This is the same technique that I've used in any of my bags that have cotton handles. I fold down the center with the interfacing sides together. I fold each side in like this, and I fold that in half, and then I do my top stitching. So this is ready to top stitch. I'm probably not going to top stitch this one for demo purposes, but we'll come back to it for the hardware. For these two, for cork, you can do one of two things, and this is a personal preference. You can fold it in half. Get rid of these. You can just completely fold this in half like that, and you can top stitch both edges. You will have a finished folded edge, and then you will have a raw edge here. You can finish this with fabric fusion or edge coat if you like. If this is not a look that appeals to you and you would rather have two clean edges, you can draw a line down the center. You can fold your edges in like this. You're going to top stitch down the middle about 1/8 of an inch. You're going to do the same thing over here. So you're going to have top stitching in the center, and then you're also going to top stitch the sides to keep it flat. It all depends on my mood, really. I like the look of the finished edges on the handles, but I don't always love the top stitching down the center because for me, it's never quite even. So it will be evenly spaced for a while and then it kind of bows out. I just don't stitch as straight as I would like to when I do this technique. So unless I have the exact same color thread, which I don't today, I don't usually use that technique. I just fold mine in half. And when I'm piecing like this, you can absolutely piece at a 45-degree angle, just like you would do for binding. That's going to give you a nice strong strap. That's not a problem at all. Because I had shorter pieces, I didn't want to lose any more than I already had, and I am going to make this an adjustable handle. It's not going to be crossbody length, but it's going to give me some room to adjust it. So what I did is I sewed a straight seam and I split it. I just cut in the center, close to but not through the stitching line. I did 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch just to make it a little bit stronger, and I split that. And then when I fold this in half like so, my seams kind of nest together, and that eliminates a lot of the bulk. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to top stitch this one. I'm also going to stitch this single handle just so you can see how that looks, to see the difference in stitching. Then we'll come back and talk about using the adjustable hardware. I'm also going to take over my little scrap right here. This was just a 3-inch long scrap. I cut this so that I can make my tab, so I didn't have to take more from this strip. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Remember, this is not in the pattern. None of this is in there. You're just doing a single handle in the pattern, and you can follow that and just keep on going. I just wanted to give you the option. A lot of people like to have adjustable handles, so I just wanted to kind of go over that for you. So I will be back with my top stitched handles. I have my handles top stitched, so I'm going to show you what they both look like. And of course, because I said I'm not usually happy with how these come out when I fold to the center, this one came out pretty perfect. So I guess the key is tell people that it's not gonna look good and then it looks amazing. So I'm actually very happy with this, even though I normally don't love how these come out. So again, I had my line in the center and I just drew that with a chalk pencil and then folded my edges in. I top stitched 1/8 of an inch from each of those folds, and then I did 1/8 of an inch down the sides. So that is a single handle. This is ready to go. It's a little on the short side, so again, it depends on what I want on my bag, but this one is all set. I will not be using this one today. I'm going to use this in another project because today I want to use this one right here. So this is not quite a crossbody length. This is probably about 34 inches in total, and then I have 3 inches here for my tab, completely separate. If you want a crossbody length, depending on how low you wear your bag and your height, I'm only 5'6", so I don't need anything super long. You want your crossbody strap usually between the 50 to 60 inch length. That's gonna give you enough room to really play. This bag, the way that it sits with the scoop on the top, you can get away with a little bit shorter strap. This is still gonna be adjustable for me, but I'm definitely not gonna be able to wear this crossbody. So I'm going to show you how to put your adjustable hardware on here. What I would do first, I have my tab right here, is I would take my rectangle ring and I'm just going to fold this over just like so. And what I do, because it's cork and I have some threads I have to trim here, don't mind those, is I fold this about probably about 1/2 to 2/3 of the way. I don't fold it completely in half because that would be 4 layers of cork that I have to get my machine through on top of the bag itself that it's going to be sewing through, and I also have to top stitch at the end. Again, I'm using my domestic. If I had my industrial, I probably wouldn't worry so much, but this just makes it a little bit easier for me to get through with my domestic. So I don't fold it completely in half. This will be sewn into a seam. I'll have this little bit of a raw edge, but I'll make sure that that's towards the back of the bag or towards the inside, so it's not going to be as visible when I'm using the bag. So that's ready to sew. I would just sew across here about 1/8 of an inch, and then so that my ring doesn't move around, I'll get as close up here as I can, and I'll kind of just sew back and forth a few times as well. So I'm going to grab a clip, and I'm just going to hold that there. That's ready for sewing. For my handle, what I'm going to do is take one of my ends here, and I'm going to put the end up and over the center bar of my slide. So just like this, all right. I slide that down. It's probably about 1 inch. I don't measure this. There's no exact measurement. It does not need to be perfect, but I'm roughly 1 inch here. Again, I'll add a clip because I'm not going to sew this yet. I want to show you how these go together. So again, what I would do is sew down here about 1/8 of an inch, and if I want to, I can sew up here as well. The slide doesn't seem to wiggle around as much as the rectangle ring, or if you're using a D-ring in projects, that kind of thing. I like to sew this up close. This one doesn't really matter. So let's say I have both of these sewn. I'm going to take my handle, make sure that it's not twisted, and I'm going to loop this on. Now here's a little trick I'll show you. I like to make sure, because I have a clean edge and a raw edge, that they're going in the same direction. So what I'll do is just do that. And when I'm done with this, that would be facing out, and I don't really want that. So before I actually sew this, I'll take it and flip it around like this. I still gotta clean up those threads. So let's say I'm gonna sew this. I kind of test it out before I go to the sewing machine. I'm going to leave that on there loose. I'm going to take this piece, excuse me, come back up and over that center bar, just like that. And now I have my adjustable handle. And now when I put this into the bag, I have both of my clean ends going in the same direction. I hope that made sense. If not, here's another way that you can do this before you go to the sewing machine. Get this ready to go, just like I have it, and just leave your rectangle ring on here by itself. Now that I have this ready, I'll take this piece, and I know I want my clean edges together, fold this over. I want this to be facing inward, and now I know how that's gonna go. So that's just something a little extra that I do. This is all just a bonus for you guys. So this is ready to sew. The only thing I have to do is take this out, get those sewn, and then this will be ready. So what I'm going to do is actually take this apart for now because I want to show you what I would do if this was fabric. Let me take this off. I'll just redo that before I get to the machine. So this is going to be my fabric handle. It's going to be nice and long, whatever length I've decided, because I want this to be a long adjustable handle. I made sure to top stitch, and I have my loose end here, and I would also cut from the other end where it's short. I would cut my tab, okay? I would cut a few inches off. If you want, you can cut the tab first and skip the interfacing altogether. That's totally fine. I do that a lot. This is all to eliminate bulk. And when it comes to fabric, I don't have the option of leaving raw edges because they're going to fray. The cork is not. So this is all top stitched. We're just pretending. And I would be taking my slide. Again, I'm coming up and over. And what I would be doing here is taking this end and folding it once and then twice. By doing that, I'm eliminating the raw edges, I'm tucking them in, and I'm also making sure it's gonna go through my machine. Now, let's just say, for instance, you've already gone a little bit too far, you didn't realize that, and your ends all have interfacing all the way down to the bottom. It's okay. You can do this, do it just like you have with the cork, just fold it once, and what you can do is just stitch real close here several times and then just trim that away. You can use a little bit glue or fray check on there to make sure that it's not going to fray over time. It's never the end of the world if you accidentally interfaced too far down. And for your tab, what I would do, let's pretend that this is short. I do usually skip the interfacing altogether in my tab, but what I would do is I would fold this completely in half, okay? So let's just say this is fabric. I would fold it completely in half like this. That way all those raw edges will go into a seam. Okay, so this was all just extra. Again, it's not in the pattern. I hope that it makes sense. I do have a separate video talking about adding slide sets on the YouTube channel if you want to check that out. And if you're not sure, you can always send me an email. Pictures help. That way I can see exactly what you're talking about and I can walk you through it. But adding an adjustable piece of hardware is not hard at all. The hardest thing is just kind of deciding at the right time and making sure that you haven't put too much interfacing on. Whoops, I'm talking and I forgot to put my my slide or my bar on, my rectangle ring. I'll get there. So let me put this on so I can get this ready and prepare this for the sewing machine. Take that through. This gets sewn into an end. This is where I want my tab. I want the raw edge this way, and I want it folded like that. Does that look good? Yes. Okay, so this is ready for sewing. I'm going to take this over to the machine, get my sewing done. My handle will be ready. I'm going to set that aside for now. Once I'm done with the handle, I will be ready to start working on my outside zipper pocket. For step 4, I have one of my outside pieces. This has the top and bottom already sewn together and top stitched. I did forget to mention this in step 2, but you will want to make sure that your piece measures as the pattern indicates. Sometimes depending on seam allowance or any errors in cutting, sometimes it can be a little bit bigger. You'll want to trim that down. If for some reason these pieces come out to be a little bit smaller, maybe there was a cutting error or your seam allowance was a little bit larger, it's okay. Just make sure that you cut down your lining pieces to be the same size. So even if it's a 1/4 of an inch, it's not a big deal. It's not going to affect the finished bag. So you can go ahead and just make sure all 4 of those pieces are the same size. So I have my piece here. I also have one of my H pocket pieces. This does not have any interfacing. And I've gone ahead on the back and I've already drawn my lines as per the pattern. So first thing I did, and I forgot my V's here. So first thing that I did was I measured up 1 inch from the seam. So not from here, but from this seam right here that I sewed. I measured 1 inch up for my first line. I drew my second line and my third line. This is all in the pattern for you. I made sure to end the box and make it the correct size. And then I used my pen and I just drew those little V's right there. So now that my lines are all drawn, if I was using cotton, I could use pins, but because I have cork, I'm gonna use clips. I'm going to take my H piece and place that right side up. This is hard to tell because it's the Essex linen, but we're going to say that this is the right side. And I'm going to put my bag part, my bag outside, right side down. and you can find the center on both of these. I'm just kind of eyeballing it to make sure I have about equal room, equal distance on either side. I have it hanging out a little bit up at the top. This doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's here or here. It really doesn't make any difference. I'll show you when we get to the end why it doesn't matter. So I'm just letting it hang out a little bit so that I can clip it in place. I'm just gonna add a clip to each corner. If this was cotton, you would be putting some pins up here. Now, here's the only downfall. Because I have cork, I can't really clip this in place, and I don't want to put a pin through my cork. I'm going to have to be really careful when I go to the sewing machine. If you have cotton, you'll be able to pin this. With cork, I can roll this up if I want to. Why don't I do that? That way, I don't have to worry about this moving on me. What I want to make sure is that when I'm sewing, because I'm going to be sewing with this side up, that this pocket doesn't get underneath and get caught. That's not something we want. It's hard to take that out. I don't want to have to do any ripping, at least not if I don't have to. So now that I have that in place, I'm going to stitch just around the outside of the box. That's it. When I'm done, I'll show you how to do the next part and to add your zipper. I stitched just around the outside of the box, and now I'm going to cut. So I'm going to leave my pins or clips in place, and I'm going to cut from the point to the other point of the V. You can do this on your mat with your ruler and rotary cutter if you prefer. I'm just going to do it with scissors. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get this started. This does not have to be perfect. It's just the cutting part. We're going to press it, and the pressing is a little bit more important, I think. So I'm just cutting. When I get down here to the V, I'm gonna cut right into the corner. I am not paying attention to where I drew, I'm paying attention to where I stitched. So I wanna get as close into that corner as I possibly can. So I'll do that again over here. I'm just gonna cut and then stop. The V is just to tell you to stop. That way you don't overcut. And now I'm gonna get my scissors right in there, right into, but not through the stitching. And I'm ignoring where I drew and just paying attention to where I cut, or where I stitched, excuse me. So now I'm gonna take my clips off, and I'm gonna pull this through to the back. I'm gonna take this over to the ironing board, and I'm gonna press this opening as good as I can. It's always a little bit more difficult to do that with cork, but I'm gonna do the best that I can, get a nice smooth opening. I pressed my zipper opening, so let's take a look. When it comes to cork, again, it's a little bit harder to press it and get it perfect just because the cork is a little bit thicker and stiffer. So what I do when I am doing that is I start on the back side. I have a couple little wrinkles here, nothing major, but I start on the back and I try to kind of, work my way around, and I use my pressing clapper. So as I'm working my way around with the iron, I'm setting the pressing clapper on the part that I just pressed, move along and kind of go that way. I do the long sides and then I do the short ends last. Then I'll turn it over and take a look and see how it looks here. You can see that my pocket fabric is showing a little bit all the way around, but I'm fine with that. I really don't care, and it's even, so it looks nice to me. I think it looks like a little bit of piping, so I'm gonna leave it. This can happen with fabric as well, but especially with the cork, I would have to sit there and really work it to get that seam flat. I'm not as concerned about it, so I'm just gonna leave it. I like how that looks. So now that that's done, I put my clips back in. You'll put your pins in if you have fabric. Make sure that my pocket is flat. And on the back side, I'm gonna go ahead and use the non-fusible tape. Again, you can use fusible on the cotton, you can use this on either. Because I have cork and I'm not gonna be able to press from the front side, I'm going to use the non-fusible. So I'm just gonna take a strip of this and put it right along my edge here. I don't do the short ends. I've tried and it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference, so why bother wasting the tape and wasting my time pulling the paper off? So I just do that, push that down, and then if this was fusible, I would be ironing that down. Because it's just the regular tape, I'm just gonna peel this off. I didn't quite get this end down. There we go. So I peel off my paper. Sometimes I'll use my scissors to really push that into the fabric. Okay, so now I have my tape. It's already sticky. I'm still gonna do this the same way I would if I was at the ironing board. I'm going to place my zipper right side up. I'm gonna take my piece, also right side up, and I'm gonna set this right on top, trying to get this as even as I can. Okay, I am happy, except right here, there. All right, so that is in place. If I was using fusible tape and I had cotton, I would be ironing this down, but I'm not gonna do that with the cork. It's just too hard to do that. So if you were using cork or vinyl or anything like that that you can't iron on or can't get heat through if you iron on, you can use the non-fusible tape. So that's in place. It's not going anywhere. I don't have to worry about pins. Now I can sew this at my machine. I'm gonna sew right around about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch or so using my zipper foot. I'm gonna go all the way around just once. When I'm done, I can close up my pocket and I'll be almost finished with this. Zipper is all sewn in place. It looked a little bit close to the pole, but it's good. My pole is opening just fine. It's not getting caught on anything. So now that that's done, I'm gonna close up this pocket. I'm gonna take all my clips out and turn this over. First thing I like to do is trim off the ends of the zipper just so that they're not getting caught in the seam allowance. I don't want to trim right to where I sewed, but I'm gonna trim kind of halfway. Do the same thing over here just to get rid of some of that. And now what I'm gonna do, first things first, is I'm gonna take the top edge and the bottom edge and pull those together. And I'm gonna sew 1/4 of an inch all the way across there. Once I have that sewn, I'm going to pull this so it's hanging down towards the bottom of the bag. I want this pocket to be hanging in the way that it would when the bag is finished. So I'm pulling it down towards the bottom. Then I will go ahead and sew my side seams. 2 things to keep in mind. This pocket is not sewn to this. We want it to stay loose. So all of my seams that I'm sewing right now, they are not going to be sewing it to the cork. And when I'm sewing this, wherever this seam happens to land, it does not matter. So if yours looks different than mine, if it's higher, if it's lower, it does not make a difference. It doesn't have to be directly on the bottom of the pocket. And actually I prefer it that way because I think it makes it a little bit stronger. When I sew my sides, I just push that seam down. You can press it if you want to. I usually just sew it all together and I don't worry about it, but absolutely press if you want to. I will be right back with my finished pocket. Pocket is done. I'm gonna trim some of these little frays here and threads. So let's take a look at how this turned out. So this is the bottom of my bag, the darker color down here. My pocket is hanging down towards the bottom. I sewed the top and bottom edge together with 1/4 of an inch seam, pushed it down. I did not press it. You can if you want to. And I sewed my side seams, not sewn to the bag itself. So on the front side, the only stitching on the pocket is right here. And I do move my pull over a little bit when I am sewing this because I'm going to be folding that over. So what I don't want to happen is for this pull to kind of push its way in and get hit by the needle. So I just move that over a little bit. I sewed that, and now I have a nice functioning pocket. There will be another one of these pockets on the lining. We will get to that in a later step, but the cork one is the one I really wanted to show you because it has to be handled a little bit differently because of the challenges in pressing your cork. So this is done and I'm ready to move on to my next step. For step 5, we're going to use template 1 to trim our outside pieces as well as the linings. We are not quite ready for the linings yet, but since we're doing the trimming using the template, might as well do them all at once. So what I like to do is I like to mark out one of these, get it all cut, and then use this piece as the template for my other pieces. I find it a little bit easier that way, and I feel like I have less of a chance of making a mistake. If I do make a mistake, at least I made it on all of those, and hopefully it will even itself out. So what I'm going to do here, I've already drawn on this one, so I'm just gonna move this over. We have to do this on the top. So it's gonna be on the top part of the cork or the outside. It's also gonna be, if you have a directional lining fabric, make sure your lining is right side up. The lining pieces are squares, so it's a little bit harder to tell. So just make sure that your direction is going up. So what I've done is on the back here, I found my center. okay? I made a little notch and I also made a mark, and I also drew a line further down. Now, because I have cork, it's okay. I can draw that. No one's gonna see that line. If you have a lighter fabric, you might wanna do that with something erasable, or you could even just use a pin, whichever is easier for you. I also have in the directions measurements from the sides. So if finding the center is a little bit hard for you, you can also use the measurements provided here. As long as your pieces are the exact same size that the pattern says and you haven't trimmed them down, if you trim them down, you're going to need to use the center marks. If they are the correct size, you can use those measurements. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to line the top edge up right here, and I'm just gonna add a clip, and I'm gonna do the same thing up here. So I'm just lining that top edge up, and I don't care about anything out here. I just care about this right here. That's the only part that counts. So I'm just gonna use my pen and draw that. This piece is gonna be cut away, so it doesn't matter. I'm drawing on the back, so it also doesn't matter, but even if I was drawing on the front, I do have a seam allowance that will be added here, but if I draw anything up here, it's gonna be cut away. There we go. And now I'm just gonna take this off, put that aside, and go ahead and cut. And if you want, you can also turn this or fold this in half and cut it that way. You do whatever is easier for you. Normally I would use my ruler and rotary cutter, but I felt like using my scissors today. All right, and just because, I'll fold this in half and just kind of check that out. Doesn't look like I have any overlapping. Looks pretty good, so I am set to go. So now what I'll do is take this piece and use that as my template to cut my back and also my lining pieces. And here's a question that I always get with this pattern. This piece right here that I just cut, can I use that for the flap? No, unfortunately you can't. It's not the same size. This is too small. So this is just a scrap. This will go into my scrap bin. I'll use it for something else, or maybe add it onto a wallet or something. But it looks like it should work, but unfortunately no, this is not gonna work for your flap. So I'm just gonna set that aside. I'm gonna go ahead and cut the rest of my pieces. My outside and my lining pieces are all trimmed using template 1. So I'm gonna go ahead and set these aside for now. I won't need the outside until it's time to assemble, and I'll need the lining soon, but not just yet. So I'm gonna move these over. Next up, we're gonna do step 6, which is preparing the divided pockets. These are very simple. If you've done any of my patterns before, you've definitely done this technique. So I have both of my G pieces. Now, again, I have an Essex linen, so there isn't technically a wrong or a right side, but I will be referring to what side you're gonna need. I know it's a little bit hard to tell on here. What you're gonna do with both of your pockets, remember they are wider than they are tall. You're going to fold them right sides together. So we're gonna call this the right side. I'm gonna fold it in half just like this. You can use some pins or clips if you need it. And I'm gonna sew 1/4 of an inch all the way across here, making a tube. Before I turn it right side out, I'm going to press this seam. I like to press it open. You can press it to one side, but you're definitely gonna wanna press before you turn to make it a lot smoother. So once I have this pressed, this is how it looks. So this is gonna be the front of my pocket. This would be the back. And I have my seam up here. This is the seam that I just sewed. I don't put it right on the bottom here for a couple reasons. Number one, to reduce bulk when I'm sewing this to the lining, but also in case my stitching is not totally even, and I can see my seam is a little bit more narrow to one side than it is on the other, I'm not struggling to get that straight and to really worry about where that is. This is the back of the pocket, so wherever this seam lands, it really doesn't matter. So this is the part that would be showing facing out from the lining. So what I'm gonna do is take this to my machine and I'm gonna top stitch right across here. I call that the top edge because it's the edge that's further from the seam. I'm just gonna do 1/4 of an inch right across here. I'm also gonna do the same thing, so I'll have 2 pockets and then I'll be ready to add those to the lining. I finished both of my G pocket pieces. So I have sewn both of them. I made sure to back stitch. I turned them right side out and I push my seam or press my seam a little bit up from the bottom, you can see that they're not even the same. So each one is a little bit different. The seam on this one is lower than that one, and it does not matter. That's going to be placed towards the lining, so it's not going to make a big difference at all. No one is going to see that except for you right now. When it's done, you won't see it. So I have both of my pockets, so now I'm ready to add them to my lining pieces. What I did first though, for step 7, before I can add those pockets on, is I need to trim. So following the measurement in the beginning of step 7, you're going to trim the top off. And I did that for both of them. Again, I don't have directional fabric, so it doesn't make a big difference for me, but if you do, for the next part, make sure that you're paying attention down here. So I use my ruler, my rotary cutter, and I trim these off. This is going to be for a later step for the recessed zipper. Now, if you've done any of my recessed zippers in any of the other bags, parts of it are going to be very similar. Parts of this one are a little bit different because of the shape of this bag. So don't freak out. This looks a little bit weird now, but it's for a reason. We just don't need these yet, so put these aside. You're not gonna throw them out. You still want them. Just set them aside. Both of my divided pockets are all set. I sewed them into tubes using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Press the seam open. You can also press it to one side. Just make sure you press before you turn. And then I pressed my seam up from the bottom. So my seam is about right here. On this pocket, it's a little bit higher. It does not matter that they are not even. So once I have that pressed, I went ahead and top stitched about a 1/4 inch. You can do an 1/8 if you would like, whatever makes you happy. So I have my pockets all set. So now what I'm gonna do is add them to my lining pieces. But what I need to do first on step 7 is I have to cut the top of my lining pieces. So I've already done that. I followed the measurement provided in the step 7. I measured down from the top and I cut this part off. Why did I do this? This is going to be for the recess zipper closure that we're going to add later after the pockets are in. So this looks a little bit strange. If you've done any of my recess zipper closures, part of this final step will look similar, part of it will not because of the shape of this bag. So this is just the top part of my lining. I don't want to get rid of this. I just want to move it out of my way. I don't need it right now. So I'm going to work on just the bottom part. So that will come into effect later. For now, we're going to work on the bottom. And what I'm going to do is take one of my pockets on each of my lining pieces. I don't have a directional fabric, so I don't have to worry, but if you do, make sure that this is going upright. So if you have a tree or an animal, something that has a print that has a definite top and bottom, make sure that this is your top right here. I'm going to place my pocket as per the measurements in the pattern, and I'm just going to set that right there. I've already marked and measured. My pocket is wider than the lining piece, and that's totally fine. I actually did that on purpose because your pocket is going to stretch a little bit as you're sewing it. It does not have interfacing, but this piece does, and that happens quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is pin this in place. Just going to add a few pins here. Take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew it in a couple places. First, I'm going to sew all the way across the bottom. I can do an 1/8 or a 1/4, whatever I feel like doing. Then I'm going to sew and trim the sides. You can trim first and then sew, you can sew first and then trim, it really doesn't matter, but I want to sew these about an 1/8 inch. I want those within the seam allowance, and I want to make sure that when I assemble my bag, this doesn't happen. It doesn't fall over and not get caught and making it a unusable pocket. So I'm going to sew about an 1/8 inch here, an 1/8 or a 1/4 across the bottom, and then I'm going to divide it however I want to. I can go down the center, I can measure in and make a little skinny pencil pocket, I can do whatever I want, and I can do both of my lining pieces differently if I want. So I'm going to get the other one prepared as well. I'm going to put get both of these pockets done, and then we'll be ready to go on. So both of my pockets are sewn in place. I did do them a little bit differently. I did this one with a thin pocket in the middle for a pen or, sunglasses, whatever I want to put in there. This one I just sewed down the middle. What I usually do when I'm dividing my pockets is I draw very lightly, something that I can sew over or remove, and I start at the bottom, I stitch up, I turn, and I come back down. That way it's sewn twice and it's nice and even and secure, and any of my loose threads would be down at the bottom. My pockets did shift a little bit because the Essex linen is a little bit stretchier than regular cotton, And also there's no interfacing in the pockets, just in the lining piece. I didn't use a walking foot, which is also why it stretched. If you use a walking foot, you're gonna have a lot less problems, but the way I figure it, I have to trim it anyway, so I'm not that concerned. I trimmed my edges, I did them about 1/8, and I sewed 1/8 across the bottom. Again, you can do 1/8 or 1/4. I just figured I already had that foot on, and it would just be easier to do that all the same. So these are finished. So what I'm gonna do is just set one of these aside, and I'm going to go on to step 8, and I'm going to add my zippered inside pocket. It's gonna be added the same way that we did the pocket on the outside piece. I'm just gonna follow the measurements in the pattern. I'm not gonna redo that step again since I just did that, so if you have to go back, that's totally fine. But I'm gonna go ahead and add that in, and then I will be ready to go on and I'll start making my recessed zippered closure. My zipper pocket is in. I just have one on one of the lining pieces. If you want, you can always add a second to your other lining piece. But I figured between the divided pockets, a zippered pocket inside and a zippered pocket outside, I had plenty of pockets. It's your bag, so you can always add more or less as you need. So now that this is done, I'm gonna set my linings aside. And now I'm going to work on step 9, which is preparing my recessed zippered closure. So I'm gonna grab the things that I need here. And I also want to show you before we get into this how it looks in the finished bag. If you've made any of my other patterns that have a recessed zipper, you know that at the very end there's usually a little tab or something added because the ends are not sewn in and enclosed. For instance, here is a Harper, and inside of the Harper is a recessed zipper, so it doesn't come all the way to the sides, it's just on the longer front and back, and there's a tab. This recessed zipper is going to be somewhat similar in the idea, but it actually is completely finished inside the bag. So let me show you how the other one that we're gonna do today looks. So here is a finished Stella, and inside, let me zip this up so you can see how this looks. And I did a double zipper for this one as well. You can always do a single, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So when I look down inside of my Stella, that's how the zipper looks, excuse me, and it's completely enclosed. So on the sides here, the zipper is totally sewn in. It's because of the style of bag that I'm able to do that very easily, and because of how we cut the top. Most of my bags are gonna be straight across the top like this. This one has that scoop in the front, and that's what makes it a little bit more unique, and that's what makes the zipper technique a little bit different. So I'm gonna show you how we're gonna do this. So if you've done my zippers before, kind of ignore that for now because we're gonna actually do some less steps than we normally would do. So I have my pieces here. I also have my zipper. I decided to go with a double zip. You can just do a single zip, that's totally fine. I had an extra pull, so I decided that's how I wanted to do that. You can see that my zipper does not have any finishing on the ends, and that's fine. It does not matter because it's going to be finished later. And it's longer than my pieces right here. These pieces are also longer than the, or wider, excuse me, than the lining. This is all going to help us to get pretty much a fail-proof kind of a zipper here. It's gonna come together really easily. So I don't need the zipper just yet. I'm just gonna push that here. We're gonna talk about using fusible tape and our strips and how we prepare them. So first things first, again, I don't have a wrong and a right side, so I am just going to keep referring to what side you're working on, and this right here is going to be the right side. So this is the correct side of my fabric, the pretty side, whatever you want to call it. So on the right side, I'm going to put a piece of fusible tape right across one of those long edges, just one. And then leaving the paper on, I'm going to fold this back towards the wrong side, like that. So when I do that and I press it, it looks like this. So this is my right side, this is my wrong side, and the paper is on the wrong side now. It's folded back. If you want to add another piece under here and fuse that down, you can. Not necessary, but if it helps you, whatever you need to do to make this easier. What I do is I fuse my pieces on, and then I take them, I fold them under, and I actually do it this way from the wrong side, and I press and press, and then I put my pressing clapper on top. That makes it nice and crisp. So once I have those done, I'm gonna have 4 total, 2 for the top, 2 for the bottom, and I have 3 of them ready, so I'm just gonna start with those. I'm gonna put 2 on the top of my zipper and 2 on the bottom. For right now, it does not matter where my zipper pulls are, but to make it easier for me, I'm gonna throw a clip on the end, and I'm just gonna move them both out of my way. And this will make sense when we get done. You'll see why it doesn't matter, because I have a zipper that's longer than I need. So I'm gonna take one of each of these and put them right here. I'm just gonna line that up. I'm probably a little shy of 1/4 of an inch away from the teeth. You wanna make sure you're not too close, because if you are, your zipper pulls are gonna get caught. So I'm going to fuse one of them here. I'm gonna fuse this one here. Then I'm gonna turn it over and fuse the other two to the back. So let me do that and I'll show you how that looks. I have my pieces fused in place on my zipper, so let's take a look at that. When I open up my zipper pulls, it's not getting caught on any of the fabric. I would always double check that and insist that you do as well, because I would hate to see you get this all done and then try to open it up and have the fabric get caught. Once that happens, it's really hard to fix, especially when it's in the bag. So just double check, don't put your fabric right up against the zipper teeth. So what I did is I fused 2 on the front and then I fused 2 on the back. I just use the front pieces to kind of line those up. And here's the best thing about this. This is, again, it's a super forgiving technique for this particular bag, because we don't have to finish the ends. The ends are gonna go into seams, and it's already bigger and wider than it needs to be. So when you look down here, my pieces aren't even totally even, so I have some forgiveness and some room there to wiggle if for some reason everything is not perfect, and sometimes it just isn't. Our cutting can be a little bit off. Sometimes cutting these linens, they shift a little bit because they're a little bit stretchier. So I'm not worried about this. I know that once this goes into the bag, that's gonna be hidden. When I look at my lining piece and I see there's about a 1/2 inch difference here, so it's totally fine and I'm not gonna stress about it. I do the best job that I can. I don't want it so far off that it won't work, but I'm just, I'm doing the best job that I can do. And the other thing is, this tape is removable, so if I'm not happy with this, if I don't like how it looks, I can peel this off, put it where I want it, and then press it. So now that I have this done, the only stitching that I need to do is just along the edges right here to hold my zipper in place. I can do 1/8, or I could probably do 1/4, but I think I'm gonna stick with 1/8 because I wanna make sure that I catch my zipper. If you want to sew out here as well, just to keep those sides together and make it easier later, you can do that. You do not need to, and I'm gonna skip that for now. So I'm just gonna sew 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric on either side, and I'll be back. I finished up my recessed zipper. I sewed on either side about 1/8 of an inch, and looking at the back here, I can see that I've caught the fabric on both sides. Very important that you do that. You don't want to be catching the front and not the back. So double check, make sure that you've caught everything. And I'm just gonna move my zipper pulls into the middle now, because when I use this, that's where I'm gonna want them. Now that I'm done with the sewing and it's at the part where I'm almost ready to assemble, now it's important where the zipper pulls are. So before, it did not matter. It will be for the next step. Before we get to that, we're gonna make our flap. So I'm just gonna set this aside here. So for step 10, I've gone ahead and cut out template 2. And I cut both of my flap pieces. I have cork, so I just have the 2 cork pieces by themselves. These are my B pieces. If you are using fabric, you will have your cotton interfaced, and one of these will have fleece on the back as well. If you did not interface that already, it's totally fine. You can go ahead and do that before you trim. The fleece is used so that it's a little bit thicker, so that when we add our twist lock or flip lock on, we have a little something extra for it to grab onto. For the cork, I don't add anything extra. I'm just gonna use it as is. So now that I have that cut out, I'll put my template aside, and I'm just going to take my 2 pieces. I do have directional cork, so I made sure that the flat part up here was the top. I made sure my flowers were going upright. And I'm gonna take these 2 pieces, put them right sides together like so. I'm gonna use a few clips. And I'm just gonna clip this together so I can take it to the sewing machine. Doesn't matter if it's totally perfect. I'm a little off right here, but that is totally fine. I'm a little off most days. So as long as it's going to be within the seam allowance, I don't stress about it. So I'm going to take this to my machine and sew with 1/4 of an inch from here all the way around to here. I'm gonna leave this top edge open. That's where I'm gonna turn it. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew. Before I turn and do any of my pressing, I am going to clip the curves a little bit, and I'll show you how to do that, and then it'll be ready for top stitching and hardware. I sewed my flap. I used 1/4 of an inch seam, and I made sure to back stitch when I started and stopped. So I'm going to show you two options that you can do before you turn this. I especially like to do this on cork because it is a little bit stiffer than fabric. So one of two things that you can do is around the curve here, you can just kind of grade this a little bit, take some of that seam allowance away. I'm taking probably about half, so it's about 1/8 of an inch or so. I can do that, or I can come in here and I can clip it. And when I clip it, I'm going about 1/4 of an inch apart. I'm not measuring or anything. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. And I'm clipping in without touching my thread. I don't want to compromise the seam that I just made. So I'm going about 2/3 of the way in towards the seam. And I'm just doing that on the curved part. So just on this part right here. Now I can turn this right side out, and I'm gonna grab my turning tool. I always like to use this, whether it's cork or fabric. I'm gonna turn this right side out. And I just kind of work that with my thumb and my index finger, that. And then I'll take my turning tool and just kind of work that around those edges. It's pointy enough to give me a good sharp seam, but it's not gonna poke through. So I'm just kind of turning and working with my fingers. Turn this over and do this side. And now that I have that looking pretty good, I'm gonna take this over to the iron, give it a quick press, and then I'm gonna top stitch. I can do 1/8, 1/4, both, whatever I want. I'm just gonna go around this where I sewed. So I'm ignoring the top for now. That's going to be sewn into a seam. I don't have to do anything. I can close it up if I want to, but there really is no point. So I'm just gonna top stitch right here. Then it will be ready for hardware. I finished my flap. I have the top stitching all done. I did do 1/4 of an inch, and then afterwards decided that I wanted to do a double, so I added the 1/8 of an inch top stitching as well. So it's all set and ready to go. So now that it's done, I am going to add my flip lock. Also, a little side note, I did sew across the top here just because it was easier as I was going around. You don't need to. It's going to be sewn into a seam, but I did it with 1/8 of an inch, so it won't be shown anyway. So now that that's done, I have my flip lock, the female side. If you're doing a twist lock, this is gonna be the same exact method. I've just picked the larger one, the larger style, but they go in the same way. So don't worry, it does not matter what style you have picked here. So I have my scissors, I have my screwdriver, I have a pen, I have a pin, and I also have my glue. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take the screws out of here and set them aside so I don't lose them. Those right here. If you have a magnetic pin dish, that's a great place to use it. And then I'm going to open this up. Sometimes with the gunmetal especially, they kind of stick together in the plating process. I also find that sometimes, again, with the gunmetal, the screws kind of get stuck in there. So instead of using a tiny screwdriver, you may have to go up to a little bit larger one. Use the largest size that will fit in there so that you're not stripping it. Sometimes using too small, it's just going to turn and turn, and you are going to strip the screw, which you don't want to do. So I had already loosened those up with a larger screwdriver that I borrowed from my husband. So I'm going to use the back of the flip lock to do my tracing. Right now, front and back are not important. It does not matter at all, but because this is flat and the front part actually has a ridge on it, it's easier to trace with this one. So the first thing I'm gonna do is find the center, and I'm working down at the bottom, at the finished edge. I don't care about the top right here, that gets sewn in. I wanna work down here. So the easiest way to find the center is to fold it in half. And even though I'm using cork, I'm gonna put a pin just in the seam. It's like kind of just sticking in there. I don't wanna make a mark and have it in the wrong spot and have it show later. So now that I have that in there, I'm going to take the flat back piece and I'm going to place it just above my top stitching. So if you have 1/8 of an inch, yours might be a little bit lower, and that's okay. Mine is just sitting above my 1/4 inch. The reason is I don't want it too close to the edge, but I also don't want to cut through the top stitching. If I do that, I'm going to mess up my top stitching, and I don't want that to come out as I'm using the bag. So I'm placing that here. I'm just kind of eyeballing it, making sure it looks pretty straight. I can use my ruler if I want to. And I'm going to use a pen. You can use a chalk pencil, you can use something removable, whatever you want. I'm using a regular pen so that hopefully it will show up on camera. And I'm going to trace inside. So I'm tracing in the little rectangle in the middle here. And I'm also going to put a little circle inside of each of the screw holes. Now the reason is those holes are going to need to be cut because the screws do not go through the fabric or the cork. They go into the hardware itself. You can see when you look at these tiny little screws here that they don't have a point. They are a flat screw, so they're only screwing into the hardware. That's also why we use glue. We'll get to that in a minute. But you want to make sure that you have a place for them to go. Otherwise, it's not going to screw into the right, into the front, and you're not gonna have your piece put together. So now what I've done is I've traced inside, I have my dots, and I'm going to cut. If it helps you, you can also do this. I usually just do it with my scissors, but if this helps, kind of draw almost like a football or the shape of an eye and kind of just go around, kind of around the little dot right there, because I need to cut all of that out. And the best way that I have found to do this, nice sharp scissors. I don't use any special tools. I don't use my rotary cutter. I use really sharp scissors, not the teeny tiny ones that I have. I have little like embroidery snips. I want something substantial. These are Kai scissors. These are the ones that I really like. They're a nice substantial scissor, super sharp to the point, really great for hardware. So I'm gonna take the pin out. I don't need that now. And I'm going to cut right on the outside of the line. This is a really daunting thing, I understand, and most people are going to make their opening so much smaller than they need it because it feels really weird. I just finished this and now I'm putting a hole in it. That feels strange. But what I do is I just get this started, okay? And I'm gonna keep my scissors right on the outside of my pen line. And I'm just gonna go around. You don't have to worry if you're a little bit bigger, okay? You're probably gonna be a little bit on the small side and you can go in and make it larger. But what I'm doing is I'm just working my way around so that when I'm done, I don't see any of these pen marks. If I cut them all away, this should fit perfectly on my flip lock. So I'm just kind of working my way around. I've got a little bit of wiggle room if I'm outside too far, but if you keep your scissors right on that line, you should be just fine. I'm gonna get rid of that. Because it's cork, it cuts pretty cleanly. If I had fabric, especially with the fleece in it, I'm gonna get some little frays and some little bits where I might have to go in and cut around it again, you know, some little threads. You can also use fray check. I don't normally use that unless I have to. If I was making the flap out of Essex linen, 100% I would be using fray check, because as you can see on these pieces, even from just sitting here, they get little frays. But for the cork, I don't need that. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to check it and make sure that it fits my flip lock. So I'm gonna take the front. This has that ridge and it has the two little holes here for the screws. I'm gonna check that. And what I want is for my piece to fit snugly all the way around. I wanna see the entire opening and I wanna see the screw holes. So you can see there. So now I know it's good. So now what I'm gonna do is add some glue to the front and the back. And there it is. I thought I lost my other screw. I'm using the Gutermann HT2. You can also use E6000. I like this one because the tip is really fine and it doesn't come spilling out and it doesn't glue itself to its cap. So on the back, the ridges face out. So I'm gonna do the flat side. I'm just gonna put a little bit right here. Just a little. Again, the screws don't go through the fabric, so I wanna make sure that this is not gonna twist its way out. I'm gonna put a little bit in here too. Just kind of right inside, right where the middle part kind of sticks up. Sorry, there's no good terminology for this, but just gonna do that. You can put a little bit in the screw holes too if you want, just to make sure they don't come out. That's fine. A lot of people use Loctite. I'm gonna put my glue away. And now what I need to do for me is I have to decide which is the front. If you are doing this out of fabric, your fleece side should be the front. But if you change your mind, that's okay. I'm just kind of looking and deciding, do I like one side better? I feel like I like this side better, so I'm gonna call this my front. So I'm just gonna take the front of the flip lock. This is wrong side up. I'm gonna take my front of my flap and put the front down. Put that right on there. And then I'm going to take the back. And again, the ridges go up, so the glue side is down. Put that right there. And then I'm gonna put my little tiny screws in. These can be kind of a pain because you gotta get them in there nice and straight. I have a magnetic screwdriver, so I'm gonna use that to my advantage. Put that right there. Twist, twist, twist. There we go. If I find that I'm not super happy with this, if anything is kind of poking out here, I can either use scissors or I can take this off now. The glue's not gonna dry immediately, so it's okay if I have to take it out, but I've checked everything and I think it looks great. I am super happy with that. So I am done with that part of the flap and I'm ready to go on. Last is going to be adding the male part of the flip lock to my bag. So what I have here is my outside front. This is the outside that does not have the zippered pocket. I'm using the back to make my markings because I already have my center marked from when I used my template. So I'm just gonna find the center again. I used my ruler and I measured down as per the pattern and I placed my washer right up against the ruler. So I used that measurement. I marked in both of the little slits here. If you have a different style washer that has many little openings, just make sure that you are using the correct ones. Just kind of check that. Once I have that marked, I'm going to take my seam ripper. I find it easier to do it with my seam ripper than with scissors. And I'm just going to poke this in here. And what I like to do is then poke that out the top and then I can just cut across. Rather than trying to cut and stop and maybe overcut, I put it in at the bottom, poke it through the top, and then just cut like that. Now I have my two little openings. So what I'm gonna do is on the front here, I'm going to put my flip lock through. Of course, I have to find the little openings now. So I'm gonna put that through. If you want, you can add a little bit of glue back here. That's totally fine. I'll do that just because I have my glue out. So I've already got it. I'll add a little bit back here. Not too crazy. I don't want it to come out the sides. And I'm just going to put that right through here. And you can see on the back here, I'm gonna take my little scrap of interfacing. I just cut a little piece I had left over. I'm just gonna fold it a couple times. You can use fleece, you can use a little scrap of cork if you have it. I just like to add a little something to give it some cushion. I put that between the prongs, put my washer on like that, and I'm just going to fold the legs over on top of each other, just like that. So that's the view from the back. And from the front, that's how that looks. So there it is from the front. And this is all set to go. So now I am finished. I can check it out because this is the fun part. Put my flap on there. That's how it's gonna look when it's all set. Now the only thing I have left to do before I start getting into some of my assembly steps is add a handmade tag. If you want to, it's totally optional. This would be a good time to go ahead and add that. So I decided I am going to add a handmade tag, and since this is a really good time to do that, I'm gonna decide where on the front of my bag I want it. I think I want it down here on the purple. I am just completely winging this. I'm not measuring it or doing anything special. I'm just gonna kind of decide where I want it. I do have to cut my corners to make the depth of the bag, so I don't want to go over too far. So I'm gonna put it towards the front. Actually, let me look at the finished bag. Oh, and I put it in the same place on this one. I think that looks pretty good. It's kind of right near where the flap will be. Yeah, that's gonna be it. So I'm just going to check which openings I need, and it looks like I need one in from each side. So I'm gonna do one in from each end. Do the same thing with my seam ripper. Put that in, and then back out, and cut, in, out, cut. Put my handmade tag on. The handmade tag is not weight bearing, so I don't put anything behind it except for the washer that it comes with. I don't think that I need to. Again, fold the prongs on top of each other. Make sure it's straight. I don't even add glue or anything to this. That's all that it needs. It's just letting people know that I made it. So now that that is ready, I'm gonna clean up my workspace and we're gonna go on to assembling the back. I completed step 12. I went ahead and I cut the corners for both of my outside as well as my lining pieces. I don't need my lining pieces right now, but I was already cutting, so I thought I would do them all at once. So you're just gonna cut in the bottom corners of the two bottom lining pieces, the ones with pockets, and you're also going to cut, get this out of the way, you're going to cut both of your outside pieces. So now it looks like this. This is how we get the depth of our bag and how the bag will stand up on its own. So now that those are done, that was an easy, quick step. Now we're gonna go on to step 13 and start assembling the bag. So I have my flap. I also have my clips here. First thing I'm gonna do is on the back, the flap is gonna go on the back part because it's going to reach around to the front. So what I'm gonna do is on the back, I'm gonna take my flap, put it front side down. So I want the screws facing me. I'm going to find the center, or I'm just gonna kind of guess here, but I will probably measure before I sew. I'm just gonna clip this in place, just like that in the center. Take this to the machine and just stitch 1/8 of an inch within the seam allowance just to get that basted in place. That's all I wanna do for now. I basted my flap in place. I stitched about 1/8 of an inch. I made sure to center it. I did check my center before I sewed. It is facing down, so it's right sides together with the back. So I have the front side of my flap facing towards the zipper. So now that that's done, corners are cut and everything is finished here, it's time to make the outside of my bag. So I'm going to take my front, that has the other half of my flip block on it. I'm gonna put these right sides together and I'm gonna clip around. First thing I like to do is line up this seam right here. That's really the only spot that I have to match, and I wanna do it as best as I possibly can. So I'm gonna do that on both sides. And I'm just going to try to line that right up. Hopefully everything else lines up nicely. Once I have that done, I will just add clips all the way around. I'm gonna be sewing the sides as well as the bottom, so I don't really need to do anything at the top or anything in this curved area right here. I'm just gonna add a few clips. I am skipping the corners because I'm not gonna be sewing those. I'll be boxing those afterwards. And there we go. So now that that's all ready, I'm going to sew this using 1/4 of an inch seam. I'm gonna come down both of the sides and all the way across the bottom. I'm not sewing the corners, I'm not sewing anything up here. I do like to stitch this twice so that it's extra durable because it is the main seams of the bag. Once that is complete, we'll do the corners and then add the handle. I stitched the outside of my bag. I stitched the sides as well as the bottom. I did stitch twice. You can stitch 1/4 of an inch 2 times so that you have your stitching on top of each other. I did 1/4 and then I did roughly 1/8. I just kind of eyeballed that so it's not perfect. But I just did that to really make the seam nice and secure. It really doesn't matter what you do, but I like to do it twice just because it's the outside of the bag. So I have this and that done. I did not do anything up here. The top is not touched and neither are the corners. So now we're gonna box the corners, which is a very simple thing to do if you haven't done that before. You're just gonna pull your corner, the inside corner, and you're gonna straighten it out. I'm putting together the side and the bottom seams that I just sewed. So just like this, just gonna add a few clips. 1, 2, 3, it doesn't really, you don't need too many. I'd say 3 at the most, 1 in the center and 1 on each side. And now I have that flattened out, so I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. So my side seam and my bottom seam are gonna come together. So I'm going to straighten that out, just like this. And I just push my seams in opposite directions. I have not pressed anything. Even if it was cotton, I wouldn't press anything. So I'm just gonna clip this. You can see here, I didn't do a perfect job cutting on my corner. So I'm just going to cut that little bit away, not a big deal. If your corner is really off, you might wanna check and make sure that you haven't mismeasured anything. You could have measured both of your pieces a little bit differently, so just double check that. For a little bit, I don't worry. So now that's how that looks. I'm gonna take this back to the machine, sew my corners 1/4 of an inch. When you're sewing them, make sure that you're getting this as straight as you can. Your bag wants to do this. It wants to kind of point. Just kind of straighten that out, give it a gentle tug, get that as straight as you can. I'm gonna do this 2 times. I'm gonna make sure that I back stitch and then I'll be ready to add my handle. I boxed my corners, so now my bag will actually stand up on its own. So the last thing that I have to do is to add my handle. Now, normally when I'm making a bag, I usually turn it right side out at this point and add my handle while the bag is right side out. For this particular bag, I actually keep it turned right side in because if I do the single handle, it's a little bit on the short side and it's not gonna reach all the way around the bag. So it can be kind of hard to maneuver that at my machine. So what I like to do if I'm using a single handle, this is my seam back here, this is kind of my wrong side, is I would place that centered right here on this seam. If you want, you can use your fingers to open this up. If it's easier for you, push it to one side, whatever you want to do. And I have not pressed anything at this point. I just don't really feel the need to, especially with the cork. If you're working with fabric and you want to press, that's fine. So I would just clip that in here, and you can see that's how that's gonna look. Now I can take this to my machine, stitch across here about 1/8 of an inch within the seam allowance a few times to secure that. But this is not the handle that I'm gonna be using today. So I'm gonna take this one out, and we're gonna talk about using the adjustable handle that I made. I have that in the matching print. So what I'm gonna do first is open this up. All right, just gonna open that so I get this nice and long, just like so. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clip it the same way, centering it on the side seams, but because I have hardware here, this is gonna be the right side. I want this facing in towards my bag. So let me clip this and then I'll show you how that looks. I don't have a center seam on this one because I folded it in half, so I'm just kind of eyeballing it there. And so now you can see my threads. You can see all my loose threads. There we go. You can see that the right side of the tab, the more finished side, is facing down. The slide is also facing inward. That's what I want. I want that facing towards the right side of the bag, so that when I'm done and I turn this right side out, that's going to be facing in the right direction. I don't want my slide facing in, I want it out. So I'm putting those right sides together. So that's all set. I'm going to do the same thing, take this to my machine, stitch back and forth a few times to secure that in place. Then I can turn this right side out, give it a final look, make sure all my seams look good, fix anything that I don't like, and give it a press. And then I will be ready to go on to my lining. My outside is all set. My flap is there. I can hook that just so I can see how that looks. It's looking pretty. I really like how this is coming out. I have my handle sewn in. I checked all of my seams. Everything looks good. Everything's nice and lined up, so I don't have to make any adjustments. I'm going to set this aside for now, and I'm going to start working on the lining. So this is done for the moment. So now it's time to go on to step 14 and finish up the lining so that I can put my bag together. So I just need for now my recessed zipper. I'm also going to need one of the bottoms and one of the tops. The other two I'll use in just a minute, so I'm just gonna start with one set. So first thing I'm going to do, and I mention this every time I do a recessed zipper, and this one is no different. There will come a point where you are pretty sure that you did it incorrectly. If you do everything I tell you to do the way I say it, you will be fine, I promise. But there is gonna come a point where you think I messed up somewhere and this is wrong, and it's okay. It happens to everybody. So first things first, I'm going to start with a bottom right side up. I'm going to take my zipper, and this is also going to be right side up. Now, because my zipper is longer, I'm just gonna kind of eyeball, just kind of roughly center that. If I want to, I can add a clip right now, just add a couple to keep this in place. All right, I'm starting with the side that has the zippered pocket, but in reality, it does not matter. The only time that I really care is if I have a single pull zipper, and what I normally do is make sure that that pull and this pull are on the same side. I don't know that that actually matters, but in my head it does, so that's why I do that. With a double pull, it really does not make any difference. So I have bottom right side up, recessed zipper right side up. I'm going to take the top right side down. So it's gonna go like this. It looks kind of funny. Ignore the zipper and make sure that you're lining it up with the other parts of the lining. I'll add a few extra clips here, like that. Make sure that's lined up on this end, and one more clip for good measure. So those are all ready to go. So now I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way across here. Don't worry about all this that's hanging out on the edge. We don't care right now, we'll care later. So just 1/4 of an inch, make sure you backstitch, sew all the way across there. Side one is all set. I did give this a quick press. I just pressed up towards the top of the lining just to kind of smooth that out. You don't have to do any top stitching here. If you want to, you absolutely can, but I don't at this point. So I'm going to now add the other two pieces, I'm not sure if it's going to help at this point, but hopefully before you panic and think it's wrong at some point, if you think about it, this is how the bag is going to look. You're going to be looking kind of down into it. This is the top of the bag. It's usually within the next step that people think something has gone awry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore these two pieces and I'm just going to use this half. I'm going to grab the other bottom. Don't worry about the pen marks that are on here. I did that by accident. It's just a sample. So I'm going to put, again, bottom right side up. This has my pockets, right side up. I'm going to turn this piece and I'm going to put this also right side up, lining up the edges of the lining and pulling the zipper up right here. And then I'm going to take, again, my top piece right side down. So it's going to go just like that. Add some clips, stitch all the way across, and we'll come back. The lining is stitched and it's all pressed. The pressing is not super important on this bag. I just kind of pressed it just to smooth it out so it looks a little bit better, but it's not super important and it doesn't matter which way you press it. If you want to add any top stitching, you can, but I've just never found that I needed to, so I don't do anything really here. The last top stitching will be when the bag is completely done. So now that this is ready, I'm going to open up my zipper. I have a double pull, so I'm opening it like this. If you have a single pull, just make sure that it is inside the bag. You don't want it out here anymore, and that you have a little bit of an opening. So now that I have that together, what I'm going to do is pull these two tops together like this. And I'm just going to kind of flatten that out. It's starting to look like the outside of the bag did, same shape. The only extra thing we have is the zipper. So what do we do with this part? So what you're going to do is push this up, just like that. This is why it's a very different recessed zipper. It starts out kind of the same, but ends very differently. So I'm pushing that up. I want this kind of coming up towards the top, not towards the corners and the bottom. And what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to come over to one side. If you find this distracting and you want to trim this off now, you absolutely can. I actually think I'm going to do that just so it's a little bit easier for you to see. So I'm just trimming. You can use your rotary cutter if you want, but I'm just evening that out with the sides of the interface pieces. All right. So now I have my zipper pull inside. I didn't cut it off. Very important. I'm going to line up these seams. Now, I told you I just pressed those, and I did press them both up, but I was really just cleaning up a little bit. I'm actually going to use my fingers to press them in the opposite direction. That way, they sit really nicely, and I don't get a really big clump of fabric that I have to sew over. I pushed my zipper teeth up. I'm going to add some clips. Now, when it comes to the zipper teeth, because I don't want to try and sew over it when it's going totally straight like this, it's going to break my needle and possibly my machine, is I'm just going to kind of turn it a little bit, just kind of smush that down. It doesn't matter. It's really, I promise it's not going to be the end of the world if it, you know, if it kind of turns one way or another, but I really add a few clips there to hold that together. Ideally, I would like it if my divided pockets lined up. Looks like they're pretty good. All right. And down to the corners. I have one side done. I'm going to come right over to the other side, do the same thing, take that seam right there, push them in opposite directions so they're nesting together. I did not trim the zipper very well here, so I'm going to come back in and just trim a little bit more. And this is why I use plastic zippers, because I can't do that with metal. Okay. So turn that. Okay, my seams are nested. Clip. Push my zipper up towards the top. Kind of flatten those teeth out a little bit. Another clip. And clip up to the top. Down here. Pockets are lined up, which is awesome. If they're not, oh well. Lined up at the bottom. Got that done. And now I'm going to add a couple at the bottom of the bag. My corners are a little bit off. I'm not stressing about it, especially on the lining. So we're going to sew this the same way that we did the outside, with one exception. You're going to still need to leave an opening in the lining for turning. Yes, there is a zipper I always get questioned, like, if we have a zipper, why do we still need to leave it open? It's just the way that this bag is finished. You will have to do that. So I leave a nice big opening. I'm probably gonna sew maybe an inch. I'll probably sew to about here and here, because I want a big opening to get my entire hand into, and I have a cork outside, so I want to make sure I can really push that through. I don't want a really small opening for that, for the turning part. I'm going to take this over 1/4 of an inch, sew down both of the sides, a little bit right here, and then box the corners. I already showed you how to do that, so I'm not going to show you again. I'm just going to get this all ready, and then I'll come back and show you how it looks when it's complete. Lining is all set. It looks super funny, but it is good to go. So I checked everything. I sewed my seams twice. On the lining, I really like to sew them twice as well, because I have, you know, the zipper here and I have these thicker seams. And I just like to make sure that as I'm going along the first time, when I'm stopping and starting, taking out clips, that I haven't missed anything, that everything is nice and straight. Sometimes I'm a little off and sometimes I'm straight. So I just like to do that twice. I feel a little bit better doing that, especially if it's a gift or if I'm selling it. Most of my bags are just samples, but this one I think I actually might keep for myself. So I sewed that, I did box the corners, and I left a big opening down here in the lining. That's gonna be for turning at the very end. I have my zipper zipped so you can see how that looks. You can see that it is kind of tucked up here in the side. So it is completely enclosed, different than other recessed zippers. And I really liked how this looked. This was the first bag that I ever did that had a recessed zipper, and it just blew my mind how much fun it was, and I kind of haven't looked back since. So I have that ready to go. I'm gonna open this up, and we're gonna get ready to finish up this bag. So I have my lining all set. I did take it over to the iron and just fix a couple spots that where the interfacing hadn't fully adhered. I have my outside. My outside is right side out. It's ready to go. My lining is wrong side out. I'm going to put, just like I would normally do with any other bag, the outside inside the lining. There's a few things to keep in mind before I do that. Number one, I want to make sure that my zipper is not up here getting caught. So I'm just going to kind of push that down a little bit. It's not going to lay totally flat because it is sewn into the sides, but I just want to get that out of the way. I don't want to catch my zipper teeth in here. It's going to cause me to get my seam ripper out, and that never makes me happy. So that's ready to go. My outside, I unhooked the flip lock. I'm going to turn that down. When it comes to the handle, I have a longer handle than you might have, but it's not quite long enough to go around the bottom of the bag. So I'm just gonna let it sit right here. If that's not working, I can also roll up the bag if that's easier and get the handle out of the way. I just wanna make sure that it's facing downward and I can sew it nice and straight when I get to those top edges. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take my bag. I have the front facing towards me, and in this bag, I'm actually gonna turn this so that the zippered pocket is also facing towards me. I have a zippered pocket in the back and I don't want them fighting against each other. So I'm doing zippered pocket in the front. So I'm gonna tuck that down in there. And then I'm going to align first these top edges, okay? So this is above my corner. I'm just going to put that right sides together. So I've got my lining and my outside right sides together. I'm gonna use a lot of clips. Line that up. If I can line up these seams, I will do that. Sometimes it's hard to see with the handle, so I'm not super concerned. Line this up. And then I'm gonna come over here, do the same thing. So I have the lining, I have the outside. I am working on that top edge above the corner where my handle is. Lots of clips. Line up my seams, and I'm trying to have the handle laid down instead of kind of sticking up like that. Doing the best I possibly can. Because the handle is short, it's just gonna kind of pull, but that's okay. You can always do this in pieces. If this is too much for you to clip all at once, you can do a little bit. I can take this to the machine now and sew, come back, do the front, do the back. It doesn't matter. I like to do it all at once, so that's what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna keep on working here. And I'm gonna put a clip here and here. And as I get down to where that zipper is, I'm gonna make sure that that zipper is pushed down out of the way. I don't wanna catch my zipper teeth. just gonna keep working around. If when I cut with my templates, anything is a little bit uneven, if it's minor and it's gonna be hidden in a seam allowance, I don't worry about it. If I have to trim anything, I can trim that now. Remember, the scoop that's in the front and the back really doesn't mean anything. So if yours is a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, if it's a little bit off, it's not the end of the world. It seems like I cut my cork a little bit differently than the lining, so I'm just kind of evening that out, but it's not too bad. But it happens sometimes when you're hand cutting with a template. So I have that ready to go. It's kind of squishy and looks a little crazy right now. But now I'm gonna take this over and sew. I'm going to be going all the way around, down, and back around. So I'm sewing the top seam, which of most bags is gonna be straight. This one has this big dip in it. So I go across here, down, across, and back down. I'm gonna do it twice, make sure I catch everything. 1/4 of an inch, and then I'll be ready to turn, and I'm almost done with my bag. Moment of truth, I stitched all the way around my bag. I did do it twice. I always find that when I have all those clips, it's just easier, and my first time is never that straight. So I did it twice, and I did not take the table, the extension table off my machine. Normally I would with any other bag just because I find it easier to go around the free arm. This time I left it on because this is such a wide area, and I found it just as easy. It's the same way I would have to do it if I was at home with my industrial. So I just left it on. You decide which way is easier for you. If you want to try one, one go around with it on, one with it off. I just found it easier. And again, if you need to stitch this in pieces, you kind of have 4 sections. You have 2 here and 2 here. If that's easier to just take this over, sew here, do this part, you can do it separately. You can clip it separately, whatever is going to make it easier. So one little thing that I like to do before I turn is take my scissors right in the corner and just kind of take a little chunk out of the corner like that. I find that it makes my corners a little bit more crisp. I'm not cutting through my stitching. I'm just cutting at a little bit of an angle. I like how that looks when it's all done. And I'm ready to turn this, so I'm just gonna take from the lining, from that opening that I left, and I'm gonna start turning. I left a nice big opening, so I shouldn't have any tearing, I hope. And again, when I turn, I'm kind of rolling it up instead of trying to reach in and pull the entire bag out at one time. Just kind of rolling that lining and pulling a little bit at a time. I don't want to tear anything. Get in here, I can pull the flap. That's a little stiff, get that out of the way. Grab the handle, and almost done. All right. It's not the prettiest process, but it works. So I'm going to poke those corners out on the lining, and now I'm going to check and make sure everything is good here. And I'm also going to poke those corners out from the side. So what I'm going to do is take my thumb and my index finger inside and push that out, and then I'm going to grab my turning tool and come inside and kind of poke that. So I reach in, I use my index finger on the inside of that corner, my thumb on the outside, and pop that out. Turning tool, just for good measure. And looks good, I didn't miss anything. Come around here, this all looks good. No holes, that's good. Do the same thing over here. And I clip those corners, so I think they look really good. They're nice and crisp. I put my handle on right, so it is facing the right direction, which is always a good thing. Poke. Okay. Everything looks really good. I'm gonna take this to the ironing board, give it a quick press. I'm gonna trim up some of these little threads here, these little frays. I love Essex linen, but I hate Essex linen at the same time. It drives me crazy. This would definitely be solved if I use some SF101 and then use my interfacing, but I didn't. And my interfacing came a little unstuck here because I was in a rush when I was doing this. So I'm gonna go and fix that, turn this inside, press it, and close this up, and then I'll be ready to top stitch. I'm all done. It's pressed, it's purple, it's pretty, it's everything I wanted it to be. So let's go ahead and take a look at all of this all done. So I closed my flap, everything's working really nicely here. I've got my handmade tag, it stands up on its own. I have in my strap here, my hardware and my tab are facing in the right direction because I put those right sides together. When I look down in here, I've got my zipper, which is open. Let me close that up. So there's my zipper. I've got my zippered pocket on the inside. That is in the front. I've got that one here. On the back, I have this zippered pocket. That's all set to go. So I have plenty of storage in here, and you can see how wide this is across the bottom. If you don't put too much in it, or if you need to put a lot in it, you have a lot of room here. It really expands very nicely. So I am all set. I am gonna go ahead and finish up those other two that I showed you because I have two more outsides ready and they just need some linings. So I'm gonna get those all done. If you have any questions while you're making yours, please go ahead and leave that in the comments, or you're welcome to send me an email. You can find all of the supplies that I used in today's video, including the pattern, on my website. This will be in the tutorials playlist on YouTube. That's probably where you found it. And you can also find other tutorials for some of my patterns, as well as some free tutorials. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. You can hit the subscribe button and click the little notification bell. I do upload at least once a week, if not more. We do Facebook Friday, and then we also have tutorials as often as possible. As I always say, Facebook is for fun, tutorials are for learning, and I hope you learned a lot today. I cannot wait to see your Stella bag. Thanks for joining me.